All right, welcome to the Kitchen Table Podcast. I'm Andy Himmel with the Restaurant CPAs. I'm thrilled to be joined today with Andrew Lester, founder and CEO of Tablespoon.com, a restaurant systems and technology firm that helps operators connect their financial and operational tools into a single, reliable source of truth. Today, we're going to talk about growing beyond your home market. Anyone that's ever been in this situation knows that the challenges with making that leap are usually more than anyone really anticipates. So Andrew's the perfect person, having helped many restaurants in this space move beyond their home market. So I'm really excited to dive into this today. So Andrew, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we start, I had a question that I was curious. So your career, you were with the big guys, Arthur Andersen, Grant Thornton, and then you actually started your own CPA firm, which clearly you were pretty young when you did that. But now with Tablespoon, you're hyper-focused on supporting restaurants. You're not doing the tax work. You're not doing the CPA stuff anymore. What made you go down this road?
As my CPA firm became more specialized, we started out in the early days kind of supporting a lot of different types of clients and small businesses, just kind of with general CPA services. And when I made the decision to specialize in the restaurant industry, kind of go all in, working with the clients that I most love to serve, I definitely saw even, this was 10, 12 years ago at this point, the importance of technology systems and the intersection with strong, accurate financial data for our clients, for their success, for their ability to grow.
Sure.
And ultimately, that is where we found kind of our North Star, our purpose, if you will, for being. And the reality is there's many, many great firms that are, incredibly capable and have very deep resources in the traditional CPA services. And as our business grew and evolved, we decided to focus very clearly and strategically on, what we're hopefully, where we can add the most value, right? And that's more
Sure.
on the technology and systems and outsourced accounting side.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Over the years that I was in the restaurant business, we tried multiple times to work with different groups that claim to be able to do what you do
Yeah.
in supporting the technology, building the right tech stack, the back office accounting. And it just seemed to be an area that was very challenging for a lot of CPA firms to actually do and certainly be able to be profitable with it. So it does make sense that to make sense of that, you almost have to go all in and just become an expert in that one area.
That was definitely our experience. Yeah, there was no way to do it halfway. And some of that was a function of size, being a startup, being small, hungry, wanting to grow. You can't do everything, right? Can't be everything for every client. And so, I know it's a little off topic, but, broader trend certainly in the CPA world is specialization, focus on verticals, micro verticals. And, that was absolutely critical for us. I mean, again, we're, as long as we've been doing this at this point, there's still, the deeper we get into the restaurant industry, the more fascinating and the more complex and interesting sort of the industry is to us,
Yeah.
and the more opportunity there is, I think, for us to add value and to help our clients. And, it would just be very hard, I think, to come in, from a generalist standpoint and be able to go that deep. And, probably that's true for many other industries too,
It does seem like a lot of other industries, it's kind of built into the cake. You just know you go with a financial partner or an accountant or someone to help you on the back end accounting side. You just go with someone that knows your industry. For a long time, restaurants seem to kind of just be wild, wild west. You went wherever, you went to your uncle, your cousin's firm, you went to somewhere down the street. And it does seem like, and this is part of why we started the restaurant CPAs,
Yeah.
now that there's really no geographic barriers anymore, there's great firms like yours that I would never have met 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Well, you're in Texas, right? I was in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
We never would have met, but now it doesn't really matter. So it's
Exactly.
hard to find the right ones, but there's so many great ones out there. And for us, we just saw the ability to connect those dots as a value.
Yeah, which I think is fantastic. I mean, reflecting on many conversations I've had with clients, prospective clients over the years, I totally agree. There's a big need. And, even like I said earlier, now that we don't offer the traditional CPA services, we refer, clients and prospects to other firms that do, and just totally agree and echo what you just said about the need and the importance.
And I don't think it was probably part of your thought process at the time, but I do wonder if where you're going insulates you a bit more, with AI and where the future is going in terms of what can be done with AI. I mean, what you're doing in terms of building the back office systems, that just cannot be replaced. You can't just pick that up and just move on and just let a computer do it. So I do think, and you're with restaurants, it's also another industry that, for better or worse, it's also something that's not that easily just to take away and change with AI. So I do think that it's pretty well positioned. Those are things that I would be devastated if they went away, and I just don't see how that would be possible. So I think it's pretty well positioned.
Yeah, and like I said, it's the landscape is only getting more complicated. AI has tremendous potential and opportunity in a number of areas within operations, top line revenue, know your customer, forecasting, all of those things that are super important for operators. And there's also a huge opportunity in the back office as well. But there's a lot of challenge, and I have seen this play out with many times over the years too, with startups and tech companies that want to come in and offer solutions to the restaurant industry but don't understand how restaurants operate. And I think that's been a through line for us too, is we view our end client really as the restaurant, the actual operators of the restaurants. Whereas,
oh, that's fascinating. So the people who are in there every day that are actually in the office at 11 p.m. at night or
yep,
1 a.m. at night, that's really who you're supporting.
that's who we're supporting. And now, mind you,
Yeah.
we're not directly supporting them, meaning that if they have a question at 11 o'clock at night, we're probably not going to be online. We might be, probably
Right.
not. But we view our clients, whether it's the actual owner of the restaurant group, operations leadership, the CFO, the finance team, whoever that is, all of those folks, if you were to ask them, they're supporting their operators first and foremost as well. And so that's what we really view our role. So why that's so important is, anything involving investments in tech, investments in automation, AI, any of those things, there has to be some kind of a tangible benefit. Cost savings is great, but what gets me really excited is the opportunity to make things easier for operators.
Yeah.
And so in our world, that might mean, no more data entry into Excel spreadsheets, at 11 o'clock at night in the office. That should just be done. There should be no reason to do that
No,
anymore.
what we did over the years where we made mistakes is we would bring in a new technology solution, get it into place, and that was almost like, in our minds, the end game, right? It wasn't really about the real part, which is how do we actually use 100% or 90% of it. We would put it in place and just, I think, almost magically expect some dramatic change to come from it. But then the next day the restaurant opens, you unlock the doors, you get the place clean. And I agree. I don't think we always allowed ourselves to focus on really what was helpful or actionable. And I do think there was a lot of wasted resources and time that went into maintaining those databases, and almost like a slave to the information, instead of really being able to analyze some stuff, a few items that would really have been, I think, more impactful and probably made the team happier. So I understand from that perspective. So I'm going to jump into, I guess, the heart of this conversation. I guess I'll start with, in your opinion, why does opening outside your home market create such a challenge for restaurants? I guess financially, from a control standpoint, you name it.
I think starting with probably the most obvious reason is the owner can't be there physically, right? So, expanding in your home market, you have the ability a little bit more easily to put boots on the ground as the owner to be able to be in the stores. When you expand geographically, that becomes a lot harder. So you can't oversee the guest experience personally, can't personally ensure standards are being followed, all of those things. So it's really, really critical to implement systems, across all facets of the operation. In the back office, one of the things we have seen consistently be essential is the importance of a standardized and a centralized back office. Meaning that, if you're expanding geographically, setting up the back office so that there's a single point, or a single recipient for things like vendor invoices. Vendors aren't sending bills to, every single restaurant spread out all over the place. Having a single workflow, that is really, really important.
It's funny that that's the first thing you mentioned. Sorry to interrupt, but
Sure.
when I was spending time with Bill Lindsay, and I said, "What's the one tool that you would need to have in place no matter what? What's the one item?" He said, "An AP system. You need a place where all your invoices are being entered, where the recipes live, everything."
Yep, absolutely.
So it's funny that was your first item as well.
Well, and it's because it touches so many things, right? It's a critical business process for restaurants. Vendors have to get paid, and in your home market, there's going to be different invoicing sources. There are, the R&M vendors that might leave an invoice at the store. There's all the mainline, the food vendors and things like that, invoices coming in electronically. So, and there's a large volume. So yes, AP systems are really important, and we have great technology now. 15 years ago, it was somebody at the restaurant had to print and assemble all the paper into packets and send them somewhere, and so FedEx would show up once a week with all these packets full of invoices. And obviously that was a very manual process, but it still centralized the flow of the information. And I think that's
right.
What I'm getting at is, in the digital age, there's a tendency to think, well, it's all in our emails. What does it matter? Well, it's so easy for things to get lost, and then vendors don't get paid. You don't have visibility into spend, and all of a sudden the systems start to break down.
Yeah. I mean, and when those systems start breaking down, there is a kind of ripple effect that, especially when you now have a geographic distance, right, between, you can't just walk in there and go, wait a second, why are these not entered? Why are these not in place? And I think that's exacerbated even more when you have that distance for the first time. I totally agree with that. So when systems are not scaling properly, so maybe someone says, hey, take a look. I think we did a great job. We put our own systems in place. Maybe we need you, maybe we don't. What are the first warning signs that you will tend to see when they're really not as well organized and set up as maybe they think they are?
That's a great question. I think one of the warning signs is that I would look for is sort of this proliferation of apps and tech subscriptions and SaaS subscriptions.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what can happen if the systems and if all this technology isn't set up to scale successfully, you end up with choose your own adventure, right? Which is at the store level or in different markets. I'll just give an example. So Ops decides to turn on a new delivery partner in a local market, puts a tablet in the restaurant, but the partner isn't integrated into the POS or the restaurant management system. It's a great idea, right? More sales. It's what we want to do. But by not having a strategic approach to the technology, that delivery partner isn't integrated into all of the rest of the system. So accounting struggles to get the sales recorded properly. The sales may not be flowing into the back office system, so it throws off your inventory. And all of a sudden, your data isn't accurate, right? This can also be very expensive because when technology isn't implemented strategically, you end up paying for a whole bunch of subscriptions, right, that have overlap, that some of them might do the same things. Maybe we're paying for things we aren't using, and that tends to lead to a lot of workarounds. One of the things we implemented, this was a few years ago, kind of coming out of COVID, is we actually have a separate line item in the P&L just to track tech subscriptions, so that you can really get a very clear view into what that spend is. It tends, if you don't think about it in those terms, it can get very.
No, that's fascinating. Listen, $48 a month times, 7, next thing you know, you're like, well, it's $5,000 a year.
Totally. And when you're thinking about multi-unit expansion, if you don't have a strategic approach and some degree of control over this, it can add up to, thousands of dollars a month that are being spent across the organization. Like, it's real money. It adds up.
I love that answer. I totally agree. I didn't think you were going to go that route. I totally agree. Not to mention, even as an owner of the restaurants, when I would choose a new tool, right? If it wasn't in some way forcing me to go in every single day and use it, maybe 10 times a day, I literally would go in and it was like the first time I tried it every single time. And then eventually I just wasn't even using it. And so unless there's like a centralized point that everyone all goes to all the time and everything lives there, you just forget how to use it because you're running around the restaurants. You're trying to, listen, at the end of the day, taking care of guests, making sure they're thrilled, they're delighted, that the food's amazing and consistent. That's really the business. But I do agree when the systems aren't in place, especially as you're geographically kind of distant around, let's say, the country, so much time gets put into these other things we're talking about that, $5,000 a year doesn't even start to unpack the real costs and the time and the stress and morale, that gets kind of sucked into it too. One thing that I find interesting, again, as you're starting to talk with different groups and, one group is looking to expand, another group is looking to expand. What are some of the consistent pieces that you see with those who are ready and those who are not? And I know obviously we could say, oh, they have everything in place, but what do you think? Like, what are the common mistakes that get flushed out comparing someone ready and somebody not ready?
So I'll put my CPA hat on here for a second. And I think one of the biggest differentiators is having a solid financial plan. It's so important, especially when we're expanding into new markets, because there's so much investment that is necessary to make that successful, right? So going back to where we were talking about a minute ago, the owner can't be physically in the stores. Well, so what does that mean then, right? Well, it means investing in hiring, in many cases from the outside, experienced multi-unit leadership, making investment in developing systems and developing training systems that are, repeatable, that can be applied across the organization. So all of that stuff costs money, not to mention the things that are obvious, like just what does it take to build a new restaurant and open in a new market? What do we have to spend on marketing? All of those things. So one of the big pitfalls that I have seen, unfortunately, is growth is exciting. It can lead to moving too fast in some cases, to not having frankly, enough capital or enough money budgeted to be able to ensure that it's successful. And it's a big investment. It's a lot more expensive to open in a new market than it is in your home market for many reasons. And I think until you've done that, it's hard to know what's actually going to go into that.
I couldn't agree more. I love how that answer supersedes anything related to specifically just back office accounting I think that's just, again, a terrific point. If you're not investing in the infrastructure, and if you don't have a long-term plan to make sense of that investment, you're right. That would be an absolute red flag. Bringing someone in, right? Often someone in your organization likely has no multi-unit experience, and we always would just put, our best GM into that role, and that never really worked because I couldn't provide them that guidance. We didn't have that. So I think that's a great point and a great kind of holistic approach of looking at the clients you work with, is all of these points and cylinders aligned. And right, very often, right, you're putting $2.5 million into a new location, but you're not spending what is necessary to actually make sure that ROI is there. It's sustainable beyond the first 6 months when you're going to be busy anyways. What are the main buckets operators should focus on? So, like the back office accounting structure. So in terms of reporting, KPIs, to handle sometimes, I guess, the complexity of growth, like what are the ones that you think are most important?
So we'll give you kind of a two-part answer here. I think it starts with, when we're thinking about back office accounting structure, as I said earlier, having a centralized back office. Now that could be internal, meaning there is an office, a physical office where, our client hires staff and actually, physical office, or it could be outsourced. But the model is, just to kind of explain what I've seen, what I mean by centralized is there's one accounting or back office or function, instead of having separate teams in multiple markets. And I've seen this, it's probably a little more common maybe in fine dining or in more kind of chef-driven concepts, where accounting is maybe working very closely day in and day out with the GMs and with the folks in the restaurant, where the client will think it's the best thing to do is to just put an accountant in every area or every region. And that can have some benefits, but it's extremely inefficient. So, and one of the big reasons is because it means that the accounting function isn't standardized. So you can have different P&Ls and different ways of doing things for different restaurants or different markets. And you're basically it's a very inefficient way to do things, but also it makes it very hard from a leadership standpoint to be able to really understand what's going on in the restaurants, because nothing's consistent, So it goes back to the systems.
Like operating separate restaurants with no real benchmarking capabilities.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. You can't benchmark, you can't compare. So establishing a centralized back office is really, really important in terms of the accounting structure. And again, that can be internal, that can be outsourced. I could probably talk for an hour about the considerations there. But I think part of what that leads to is, from a KPI perspective, and this is, I think, true for any multi-unit growth, regardless of geography. But one of the things that we help our clients do in the early stages of this process is, from an accounting standpoint, put the systems and the processes in place to be able to separate the costs of running the business, like the overall company, from the restaurant level P&L. This is a really important KPI for multi-unit growth. This concept of, it's called different things: restaurant level profit,
unit level economics.
EBITDA, the concept being, what is the profit that's generated in the four walls of the restaurant from running that restaurant, separate from the costs that go into running the rest of the business, whether that's...
So really diving in, so from a big picture, in terms of, again, whatever you call it, restaurant margin, flow through, that as a starting point is a critical piece to understand from your perspective, how that restaurant's operating, the value of the brand as you expand. And that's probably one of the biggest or most, the easiest benchmarking tools versus the industry, versus
Exactly.
peers and versus, sectors.
It's so critical. So we'll help our clients set up a management company or some sort of structure to centralize. Okay, how do we pay for things like insurance and above store payroll and things like that? So there's an administrative way of doing this, and then setting up some form of a cost sharing, like a management fee structure where the management company charges, it's usually a percentage of sales, typically in the industry, to the individual restaurants to help fund for the costs of running the overall business. And why this is so important is these are KPIs that are industry wide that matter to capital providers, PE funds, investors, banks. Being able to understand what you're spending on corporate G&A as a percentage of overall sales versus the margins that are being generated at the restaurant level are things that any capital provider is going to hone in on. So if you're trying to grow and you're looking for money and funding to be able to do that, you have to be able to communicate this financial information. It's a must have.
I could not agree more. I mean, that was almost half my conversation at times with PE firms over the years. Me arguing why that's no, that doesn't hit the unit level. That's an above restaurant, that's G&A, as a way to argue that the restaurants operated even better than they probably did. But you're right, that is a key piece that I don't think I understood until we um, certainly got to 3 or 4 locations, and I had the chance to work with SS&G and Gary's team. It was like a whole different world opening up. So if you're going to look, if I was an interested restaurant group and I'm coming to talk to you, and I'm fully in agreement, we need help cleaning some of this up, right? We need to separate things. We need some consistency so that we're booking everything consistently the same every time in the restaurants and outside. When it comes to the restaurants themselves, are there any KPIs on a unit level basis that, aside from just maybe basic prime costs, that you think are really important that you would recommend that they pay attention to? So if they were to ask you, hey, I want a bottom line and look at 3 KPIs or 2, what would pop into your head first?
You're not going to like this answer because I'm going to say it depends. That's the old retired tax person in me going, oh, it depends. But in all seriousness, I think it is concept dependent. One of the through lines that we hear across pretty much all the clients that we work with, whether it's QSR or fine dining, is around labor. So I think being able to separate from a P&L perspective, being able to separate out labor based on job categorization or job roles, et cetera. And payroll systems can do this where it's pretty much automated based on how people clock in and clock out. But the idea is if you're full service, you should understand at the very least the difference between front of house and back of house labor versus management, those 3 buckets. Depending on the size of the concept, you might have additional granularity within front of house, so server versus bar versus host. This is really important to track at the restaurant level, but then it should be consistent. And this goes back to a comment you made a minute ago. The consistency of the tracking across the restaurants is what enables this information to be valuable. So I think defining those KPIs that are most important at the store level, meaning if labor is a big challenge in your market, if you're opening in New York, in Manhattan, for example, or California, labor is going to be the single biggest category expense on the P&L. So if that's the area of focus operationally, ensuring that we're tracking the information the right way and that it is consistent from restaurant to restaurant is what enables that kind of benchmarking and that analysis to take place. Otherwise,
So I'm
spent trying to figure out what happened.
So in other words, so let's say if there's 4 restaurants, one of them happens to be in a market, like you said, maybe it's New York. I operated in Montgomery County in Maryland, very expensive, right? The cost of labor was very high. But there's still a base that you have to staff to be ready, and you have to accept that insert. So what you're saying is being able to drill down and look on an apples to apples comparison in terms of like efficiency, right? Or maybe back of house sales per labor hour. So the foundational component where you would go in and help them segregate this stuff, make sure it's always being accounted for or booked in the exact correct way. Right. If I'm a GM for a restaurant in a market with a really high cost of labor, that would be a huge help to me knowing that I'm looking at sales per labor hour as a way to really understand how I'm operating versus my peers.
Exactly.
As opposed to constantly feeling like, oh, we're just completely blowing the budget. But you still might be operating with the right number of personnel. So you have to look elsewhere. We have to figure another way out.
Yeah, and I think where I'm going with this is probably a little bit even more nuanced because I agree with everything you just said, but with the caveat that the underlying data and system has to be set up correctly to be able to provide that information. And that's many times that's not an issue, but we have worked with clients where they're not, even from an operational perspective, they haven't set up the job codes within the POS system in a way that is going to enable that kind of analysis. So we have to look at the whole workflow and the whole flow of the data from source all the way through to how it's coming out in whatever restaurant management system or analytics or whatever. Because if we don't get the data right at the start, it's garbage in and garbage out. And that's where, from an accounting perspective, we're in all of those little details and nuances for our clients. And that's, again, that's a really, really important part of this.
Well, that goes back to what you said earlier about the centralization of if you have 10 different people touching your POS and you have 4 different people touching your, entering in whatever, you name it, and there's just no threshold, there's no guardrails. In 2 days, that would be upside down.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I feel, and you probably have seen this. So when you go into even a well-operated restaurant company, if the information, like you said, garbage in, garbage out, if there's not 100% buy-in to those numbers, you get your end of period numbers, and the first thing that all the managers do is try to figure out why they're incorrect.
Yeah, right.
Right? That's the first thing. Why are these incorrect? So instead of having confidence in the numbers and actually diving in and going, all right, let's figure out a new way to do this or to do that, you spend literally half that day that the numbers come out trying to prove them wrong. Is that something that you kind of saw, have seen over the years when you go in?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what can happen when operations and accounting are not connected and are not, it comes from having the right processes and flow of data and making sure that that's set up right from the start and that all the financial information is flowing through all of the systems. And it sounds like kind of an obvious thing when I say it in those terms, but it's actually not that easy to do just because there are
I think it's extreme.
Yeah, there's so many different systems, especially now, that, some are integrated, some are not integrated, how making sure that everything ties back through and that the accounting, all of this information ultimately is coming through accounting, whether it's an outsourced provider or internal. And so there needs to be the ability and the tools and the training for that accounting group to be able to be able to work with that information successfully. And this is a big part of where we focus, right? It's bringing clarity to financial information. It is about shifting that focus. It's not productive for anyone, to have to spend time questioning the data. This isn't right. Where is this coming? The whole focus should be trusting the information. How do we use that information to guide operational decisions to make the store more profitable? That's where all the focus should be.
It really is a great point. In putting it through the context of, the broader conversation today about being in a new market, often it's the first one, let's say outside your home market. So you're kind of operating on an island. And frankly, that general manager for the first time needs to be the face of the restaurant. They're not in, it's not the owner or the ownership group or the existing managers that have been there since day one. That person has an exorbitant amount of work to do, and they need to be in the dining room. They need to be talking to guests. They need to be integrating themselves with the community. And I can't think of a worse use of time than spending 6 hours trying to show why the pack size or something's off, and that's why all of my food costs are off, especially if my bonus is tied to it. So I'm doubly incentivized to try to find errors.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do think that even though somebody might say, well, I don't understand how the numbers are such, the biggest challenge of going outside your market is going to be, the managing the people and this, but it's really the opportunity cost of time. And that's kind of what you're selling in a sense is we're stripping all of this away and we're giving you on a platter the information, the bottom line information. You guys go run your business. Yeah, that'd be a dream. I mean, that'd be a dream. That's something that I don't think we especially did well in my career in the restaurant, owning restaurants. Now, what about payroll or other? I assume that you would want, or you would suggest that all of that stuff is integrated to a one point. So in other words, what would you recommend for scheduling, managing the scheduling, the payroll? So on the people side, how do you expect those systems to flow?
So you definitely want to look for integrated systems that offer, in my view, flexibility and a best-in-class approach. And what I mean by that is there is a model, but this is not unique to the restaurant industry, but in technology to have an all-in-one platform or the single system that can do everything all in one system. And that's a great promise. The reality of that promise is often that it actually is not all one system. It is one vendor who has stitched together different products and put a label on them to say this is all the same. So this is important, I think, because the way I look at this at the end of the day is it's about results. It's about what works, what adds value, and what doesn't. And what I have seen over and over and over again is systems that say, oh yeah, we're integrated with, Toast, for example, only to realize that they can't accurately pull data out of the system in a way that then makes everything else work. So then what have we accomplished, right? We're back to manual workarounds. So one of the things we really look at, and we spend a lot of time vetting these things. If a technology provider says we're integrated, cool. That's not enough. Like, we have to actually vet this and understand in detail that it's actually going to work. Because that's ultimately that's where we get to the outcome that we're trying to get to, which is.
So instead of one of your clients spending 6 months perfectly integrating everything with this expectation of just flawlessness, you would look in right away and probably already know, okay, these systems, yeah, no, these guys say this, they say that, but this is what you can expect. Yeah, right there. That's a big deal.
Right. We're going to vet all of that, and that's a huge lift, right? So we have these systems that we know work, that we know, and I think the key concept here is the element of choice. It's not all in one. It's not one size fits all. It's one size fits one, and the right payroll and HRIS platform for your restaurants might be different than somebody else's restaurants, So we vet those providers to make sure that the data flows, the integration flows, deliver the outcomes that are needed from an automation and a reporting standpoint, while allowing flexibility to choose the best solution for that area. Scheduling is another example. So
yeah,
at the end of the day, what's important is, and just to use an example, a new hire comes on, where are they onboarded? Typically, they're going to need to be set up in the POS. That's usually done first, but that whole workflow for how that employee is onboarded, set up within the HR system, benefits compliance, all of those things that have to happen from an HR management standpoint. That platform has to be talking seamlessly to the POS to send things like, pay rate information, start dates, things like that, then all the way through to how that data is processed for payroll. So, an automation that sends the POS data directly into the payroll system with, kind of a rules-based, review for things like, missed punches and, overtime compliance and things like that. The power of the technology when the integrations are seamless is huge. It's absolute game changer for the back office and for operations.
right.
So that's really what we're looking for.
Right. Instead of spending, an HR person spending literally 6 days doing nothing but payroll,
Right.
they go, it's my payroll week.
Right.
You've probably heard that one, right? It's my
yeah.
payroll week. So when you hear that, right away, there's really no bar to get over. You could just walk right over the bar, and because you already know there's such low hanging fruit in making that person's life easier.
Right. Yeah. How does it sound?
Right. Instead of payroll week, it's payroll week. Guys, you can't Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every other week. You can't talk to me.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of wish that this was something that was available when we started. It almost sounds like, and I don't want to keep you all day here, but it almost sounds like in a perfect world, someone comes to you and says, hey, I got 3 restaurants. We're doing A, B, and C. We're very happy with it. We just agreed as an investor group that we're raising the capital to do 2 additional units in the following market. And here's why we think it's time. Can you come in, do a top-down review, and let's figure out what we need to do to be best positioned? I mean, that never happens, but that'd be a perfect situation, I assume, for you.
Yep, absolutely. And that could be, it could be looking at different elements of the tech stack. It could be looking at how do we set up our accounting department to manage the growth. Mm-hmm. That's actually a very common conversation that we have is, maybe we've got our 3 restaurants in our home market. We have a bookkeeper that's, doing a great job, but is kind of maxed out. We don't know that the bookkeeper is going to be able to add this additional complexity. And then, oh, by the way, how do we even think about how to organize our P&Ls and our financial reporting, and how do we report to investors? It leads to all these questions. So that's a very, very big part of where we focus. And I think I think those conversations are happening, but I think it's important to think, and I understand the focus operationally. That's making sure that that first restaurant is successful is like, that's so critical, right?
Right.
These, if they skip over thinking through those bigger picture scale questions, it can end up torpedoing the whole initiative, right?
It's interesting. When I hear that, it's interesting because sometimes you'll see someone with one restaurant or two that's overthinking the structure to the point of they're missing the critical nature of making sure that the guests are just so happy. And this is something that market just can't live without. But you're right. There becomes a point when that transitions where you can't continue to do that if the systems aren't in place, if you're expanding. It is an interesting dynamic. So if I'm a restaurant company and I'm like, all right, I don't know if it makes sense for me to reach out to Tablespoon because I only have 2 locations, but we are, our average unit volume has gone up 3 years in a row. We're looking to raise capital. At what point would it make sense for them to reach out, let's say to you guys and go, hey, can you take a look at what we're doing? When would this make sense? What would you do? What do you suggest?
So from our standpoint, where we, I think, are the most able to help is it's really that scenario you just described, where the restaurants, from an operations perspective, the client has already proven that they can operate successfully multi-unit. That's step one. Because from the scenario maybe a little earlier in the journey where there's a single unit owner operator that's got a fantastic concept that's really successful that wants to grow and open number 2. In my experience, that's way more of an operational shift than it is anything accounting or data or technology. It's going from 1 to 2 is a very, very big shift operationally. And so that's really where I think the focus should be. Basic bookkeeping and a basic inventory management system are really all you need at that stage.
Stay focused on the big picture with making 100%. Sure you're operating 2 of the best restaurants ever.
Exactly. And then when it starts to be, okay, we're looking at maybe 3, or we're looking at, beyond geographic expansion, more complexity, the bookkeeper or bookkeeping service or whatever function is in place isn't scalable, doesn't have the depth. We're ready to level up and take that next leap. That's really where we focus and where where I think we can help the most.
So you talked about early on as one of the most critical pieces, and it was a plan, right? A financial plan. So when you're at a point when you really need to kind of get that plan together, build out a plan, a business plan maybe for the next 3 to 5 years, that's a reasonable point to kind of reach out and go, hey, let me show you this plan. This is where we're looking to do. At what point would it make sense to actually engage you and your team to maybe take a look at what we're doing and figure out? So that's kind of that point.
Yeah,
that's helpful.
Exactly.
All right, my last 2 questions I have are very simple, but the first one, I have to know okay, so I'm in Cleveland, as you know, or maybe you didn't know because you didn't reach out or send me a note that you were coming into town. How did you end up in Cleveland, Ohio for your company retreat? I was completely shocked when I saw that on LinkedIn.
So you don't think everybody just wants to come to Cleveland? It's not a destination in its own right?
It was shocking to me. I couldn't believe it. I was completely caught off guard, but why?
So Tablespoon is a remote firm. We're a distributed team. And I guess we don't have anybody in Mountain Time at the moment, but basically we're spread out across the country. And so once a year we come together as a team in person for an offsite. And we have been the last couple of years just kind of locating based on sort of where we have concentrations of people. So we've done this in Dallas a couple times. We have several folks in or within driving distance of Cleveland, which is why we chose Cleveland this year. I'd never been to Cleveland, and I have to tell you, I was blown away. It was so much fun. I mean, what a cool town.
No, I love you were here at a good time of the year. So, you went to Great Lakes Brewing and some other places, and, there's no question, like a lot of secondary or third tier cities, there's a lot of really great business people that have done great stuff.
Absolutely.
It doesn't always get known, but like Great Lakes Brewing, they were 10 years, 30 years ahead of the craft brewing, space. So I was happy that you went there. And I don't know if you made it over to Market Garden or any of the others in that area.
Yeah, we didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. Next time, let me know, and I'll Gary and I will give you some suggestions.
Absolutely.
All right. My last question here. You've seen, I don't know, unlimited number of concepts ranging from the QSRs to the fine dining, you name it, everything in between. If you were going to open up your own restaurant or brand, right? You're going to open up a brand that you want to, be able to expand, grow it. What concept would you, what would be the type of restaurant?
Ooh,
Or if it's just one restaurant and
Yeah.
it's more because it's your favorite kind of food that you just would like, some people are like barbecue. That's a passion of mine. I would do that. So I guess we'll look at it in two different ways. Would it be one restaurant? And if so, what is that passion? And, or if it's this other direction where it's for growth, it's based on structures that you think are interesting.
Yeah, and I think those would be two very different restaurants, honestly.
Yeah.
Because if I'm wanting to open a concept that I know that I want to really grow, I'm looking for, a simple menu. I'm looking for something that is simple operationally. It doesn't have to be quick service necessarily, but kind of the concepts that I really love is sort of like, well, probably the biggest example would be like Kava. They're one of my all-time favorite brands.
Amazing.
Amazing
Amazing.
success story, redefining a category, around, you know, healthier options they're an incredible company. And so if I were looking to do something that I wanted to grow and scale on it, they would be sort of my role model, I think.
You would pin themselves and watch them and really.
Yeah, absolutely. If it was, a single location, kind of more of a passion project. So I recently relocated to the Portland area. I'm in Oregon now, and there are so many incredible chef-driven restaurants in this area that are kind of that profile, and it's just been amazing to explore and get to know, lots of different types of just the creativity here is incredible, right? So that's not my skill set. So I would want to meet and partner with an incredibly talented chef.
So you would want someone that you guys are partners and
Yeah,
taking advantage of. So you would something creative, seasonal, and
totally.
yeah. So pretty much the hardest thing in the world to operate.
Well, it's a passion project, right?
That's right. I did say passion project. That's true. The hardest thing. This is great. I think your ability to articulate a whole host of these really kind of challenging ideas in terms of growth and what's most important, because it is kind of an endless conversation. It could be really overwhelming. I think you do a great job of that. So I really appreciate your time. So you're going to the finance conference next week.
Yes. Yep.
So good luck. Good
Thank
luck
you.
there. I'm sure it'll be a success. And I know you guys do a ton of work there. So good luck with that. And again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed the conversation.